In a world where wealth often disconnects people from reality, Isabella Montgomery, a billionaire's daughter, was about to make a decision that would change her life forever. One sunny afternoon, she stood in the bustling streets of New York City, her hand clutching a designer handbag worth thousands of dollars. But, in a rare moment of clarity, she decided to sell it to help a complete stranger. Little did she know, the choice she made would lead her to an unimaginable turn of events. What happened the next day left Isabella speechless, questioning everything she thought she knew about kindness, generosity, and the true meaning of value. Isabella Montgomery was born into a world of privilege, surrounded by luxury and an unyielding expectation to follow in her family's footsteps. The Montgomery name was synonymous with success, wealth, and influence. From the sprawling mansions in the Hamptons to the glamorous soirees in Manhattan, Isabella had always been accustomed to the finest things in life. But despite the opulence surrounding her, there was a feeling of emptiness that Isabella couldn't shake. At 24, Isabella had it all, the perfect life by society's standards. She had attended the best schools, worn the latest designer clothes, and dated some of the most eligible bachelors. But over time, she found herself growing increasingly disillusioned with her lifestyle. The constant chatter about which brand was the most exclusive or which club had the most prestigious guest list felt meaningless to her. She had begun to crave something deeper, something real. But in a world where wealth was the ultimate currency, it was difficult to know what that real could look like. It was during one of her routine shopping trips to Fifth Avenue, where she was scouring the newest arrivals at a high-end boutique, that Isabella had an encounter that would change everything. As she walked out of the store, clutching her new handbag, an exquisite piece designed by a renowned French designer, she noticed a woman sitting on the corner of the street. Her clothes were ragged, her face tired and worn. She held a sign that read, "Lost my job, need food for my kids." Isabella felt the familiar twinge of guilt she often felt when encountering people in need. She had always been told to give back, to be charitable, but it had always felt like something to check off her list rather than a genuine desire to help. This woman, however, seemed different. Isabella looked at the handbag in her hand, a luxury she had bought without a second thought, and something clicked inside her. She hesitated for a moment. Was it the right thing to do? To sell something so valuable, something she had worked so hard for, just to help a stranger? But as she caught the woman's eyes, something deep inside her urged her to act. She approached the woman, sat down beside her, and without saying much, handed her the handbag. "I can't imagine what it's like to be in your position," Isabella said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "But I hope this helps in some way." The woman's face lit up with surprise and gratitude, but there was no time for words. Isabella stood up, gave the woman a brief smile, and walked away, feeling the weight of the decision she had just made. It felt freeing, like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. As she walked back down the street, she couldn't help but wonder what would come next. She had just given away one of her most expensive possessions, and for the first time, it felt like it was worth more than all the designer brands combined. But little did she know, this small act of kindness would set off a series of events that would completely alter her understanding of generosity, kindness, and the true meaning of value. The next day would leave her questioning not just her actions, but the very world she had been raised in. Isabella's life in the days that followed her impulsive act of kindness felt strangely different. It wasn't just the act itself, which had unsettled her at first. It was the lingering sensation that something big was unfolding, though she couldn't quite put her finger on it. She had spent years being groomed to be the perfect socialite, moving within a world of glitz, glamour, and carefully curated appearances. But now, after giving away her designer handbag, she found herself questioning the authenticity of everything around her. The next morning, Isabella awoke to a barrage of text messages, emails, and notifications on her phone. The viral video of her donation, captured by a passerby who had witnessed her interaction with the woman, had spread across social media like wildfire. Headlines read, "Billionaire's daughter gives away $10,000 handbag to homeless woman," and "Rich girl's random act of kindness stuns New Yorkers." At first, Isabella was mortified. She had done something for the right reasons, but now it was all over the internet for the world to see. Was this an act of self-indulgence, or had she really done something meaningful? Her publicist, Chloe, called her almost immediately. "Isabella, we need to get ahead of this," Chloe said, her voice frantic. "You need to make a statement. This could go either way. People could see this as a moment of genuine kindness or an attempt to make yourself look good. Let's put a spin on it, okay?" Isabella leaned against the windowsill, staring out at the city below. She didn't want to spin this. She didn't want to make it into something it wasn't. This wasn't about the media or her image, at least it shouldn't have been. She wasn't sure what she'd been expecting when she made the decision to help that woman, but she had certainly not anticipated this kind of attention. "Chloe," Isabella finally said, her voice steady but uncertain. "I didn't do it for attention. I just wanted to help. I think we should let it go. I don't want to make a statement. If people think it's some kind of PR stunt, then fine." Chloe was silent for a moment, then sighed. "I get it, but you need to think about the long-term implications. You're a Montgomery. People are watching. This could be a game changer." "Let's just leave it alone," Isabella said, cutting the conversation short. As the day went on, Isabella tried to block out the media frenzy. She chose not to read any of the articles or commentaries. Instead, she found herself reflecting on the woman she had helped, the woman who, despite her dire circumstances, had looked up at Isabella with a grateful smile. It wasn't the kind of smile one typically expected from someone in that position. It was genuine. Isabella thought about the woman's life, the difficulties she must have faced, and what it might feel like to be in her shoes. It struck her that she had been surrounded by luxury her entire life, but had never once considered the struggles of people who didn't have the means to buy themselves even the most basic things. That evening, as Isabella settled down for dinner in her penthouse, there was a knock at the door. She wasn't expecting anyone. Opening it, she was surprised to see the woman from the street, standing there with the same warm smile. Isabella's heart skipped a beat. "Hello," the woman said. "I'm sorry to show up unannounced, but I wanted to thank you in person." Isabella blinked, not sure whether to invite her in or not. She quickly shook off her hesitation, motioning for the woman to come inside. "Please," Isabella said, "come in." As they sat down in the elegantly furnished dining room, the woman introduced herself as Maria. She explained that she had been homeless for several years, moving between shelters and the streets, doing whatever she could to survive. "I never expected anyone to be kind enough to give me something like that," Maria said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You didn't just give me a handbag, you gave me hope. You showed me that there are people out there who care." Isabella's chest tightened as she listened. It wasn't just the act of giving. It was what that small gesture had meant to Maria. "I didn't think twice about it," Isabella said, her voice quiet. "I just wanted to help." Maria reached into her worn-out bag and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. "I've been working on something," she said, "a project to help women like me, those who are struggling to rebuild their lives." She unfolded the paper, revealing a detailed blueprint for a community center for women who had been affected by homelessness, abuse, and other hardships. It was clear that Maria had a plan, a vision for the future that went far beyond her current circumstances. Isabella was stunned. "This is incredible," she said, her eyes scanning the paper. "Why haven't you started it yet?" Maria smiled ruefully. "I've always had the ideas, but not the means, not the money. I'm just one person." For the first time in her life, Isabella felt the weight of her own privilege. She had access to resources, to connections, and to the ability to make things happen. Maria had been waiting for an opportunity, and now it seemed like Isabella could provide that opportunity. "I think we can do something together," Isabella said, her mind racing. "I have the means, you have the vision. Let's make this happen." Maria's eyes widened in disbelief. "Are you sure? You really want to help?" Isabella nodded, her determination solidifying. "Yes, I do. And I think this is just the beginning." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Isabella used her family's connections to secure funding for Maria's project, and together they began to turn the blueprint into reality. They found a location for the community center and hired staff. Isabella, once a stranger to the world of philanthropy, threw herself into the work. She attended meetings, made phone calls, and learned about the needs of the women Maria wanted to help. But even as the project began to take shape, not everyone around Isabella was supportive. Her parents, particularly her father, expressed concern over her involvement in such a publicized charity. "You're going to make a spectacle out of yourself, Isabella," her father warned. "This isn't the kind of thing we want our name associated with. People will talk. They'll say you're just doing it for publicity." But Isabella no longer cared about her father's opinion. She had learned over the course of the past few weeks that the world wasn't just about appearances and status. It was about making a real impact. She was determined to see the project through, no matter what her family thought. And so the days passed in a blur of meetings and planning, and soon enough the community center opened its doors. Maria stood beside Isabella, both women beaming with pride as they welcomed the first group of women who would benefit from their efforts. It was the start of something monumental, but Isabella's involvement was far from over. Just as she thought things were settling into place, she received a phone call late one evening. Maria's voice was frantic. "Isabella, we've been robbed," she said, her voice shaking. "The center, the computers, the funds, everything is gone." Isabella's heart sank. The betrayal was hard to grasp. Who could have done such a thing? She couldn't help but wonder whether someone knew how valuable the project had become, and whether someone with ill intentions was now determined to bring it down. The air felt thick with tension as Isabella rushed toward the community center. The call from Maria echoed in her mind. The center's been robbed. Everything they had worked so hard for, everything Isabella had invested her heart and soul into, had vanished in a matter of hours. She could hardly breathe, her thoughts spinning like a tornado in her head. Who would do this? Why would they target the one place she had given so much of herself? When she arrived, the scene was more chaotic than she had imagined. Police cars lined the street, their flashing lights casting an eerie glow on the faces of the women who stood around, stunned and helpless. Maria stood at the front, looking distraught, her face pale and covered in tear tracks. "What happened?" Isabella asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Maria shook her head, unable to respond right away. I don't know," she stammered. "I left this morning, and when I came back, everything was gone. The computers, the cash, even the files. Everything." Isabella's heart sank, but then something in Maria's eyes caught her attention. The woman's expression wasn't just one of shock, it was one of resignation. "You're not surprised," Isabella said softly, studying her friend's face. Maria shifted her gaze to the ground, a hint of guilt flickering across her features. After a long silence, she looked up, meeting Isabella's eyes. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice cracking. "I never wanted you to know this way, but I think I know who did it." Isabella's chest tightened as she fought to hold back the flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "Who?" Maria's voice dropped to a whisper. "It was me." For a moment, Isabella couldn't process what she had just heard. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice strained with disbelief. "I never told you this," Maria began, her voice trembling. "But when I was on the streets, I didn't just survive. I did things I'm not proud of. I thought if I had a little more money, if I had some control, I could change my life. I thought this community center was my way out, but I didn't want to do it alone. I was scared of failing, and when I saw how much the project was gaining traction, I got greedy. I thought, if I just took a little, just enough to secure my future, I could make everything work." She wiped at her eyes, a tear falling onto her cheek. "But I was wrong. I let my fear and desperation take control, and now everything's falling apart." Isabella felt a weight in her chest, a mixture of anger and sadness. She couldn't believe it, couldn't fathom that the woman she had trusted, the woman who had once inspired her to act out of compassion, was now standing before her as the one responsible for tearing everything down. "Maria," Isabella began, trying to find the right words. "How could you? After everything we've done, everything we've worked for." Her voice cracked, the hurt and betrayal evident in her words. Maria shook her head, her shoulders trembling with the weight of her own guilt. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered. "I thought I could fix it later. But now, it's too late." Isabella stood there, speechless, her mind racing. What was she supposed to do now? She had poured everything into this project. Her time, her money, her belief in the idea of second chances. And yet, it had all been tainted by the one person she had trusted most. As Isabella turned to walk away, her heart heavy with the sting of betrayal, something caught her eye. A familiar figure emerged from the crowd. It was one of the women who had been attending the center. She walked toward Isabella, her face determined and resolute. "Isabella!" the woman called out, her voice strong. "I know what happened." Isabella turned toward her, startled by the woman's certainty. "You do?" The woman nodded. "I saw Maria earlier today. She was acting strange, kept glancing around like she was waiting for someone. And when I saw her leave, I saw her hand off a box to a man in a black jacket. I didn't know who he was, but I knew it wasn't right." Isabella's stomach dropped. The pieces were starting to fall into place. It wasn't just Maria acting on her own. There was someone else involved, someone who had been in the shadows, pulling the strings. "Who was he?" Isabella asked, her voice tense with urgency. The woman hesitated. "I don't know his name, but he's been around the area. He works for one of the big construction companies in town, ones that always seem to get city contracts. People around here don't trust him, but they don't say much." Isabella's blood ran cold. She knew exactly who the woman was talking about. Tom Keller. He was a well-known figure in the city, a man with deep pockets and even deeper connections, a man who had the power to make things happen and the influence to keep things quiet. Isabella had heard whispers about Keller before, about his questionable business practices, but never once had she suspected he would be involved in the very project she was trying to build. "Maria," Isabella said, turning back to face her, "what did you do? What did you get yourself involved in?" "I'm sorry," Maria said, her voice full of regret. "I thought he could help. I thought he could give me the stability I needed, but I was wrong. He promised me money for the center in exchange for some information. I was naive, and I trusted him. I didn't realize until it was too late, until I saw what he was willing to do to get what he wanted." She buried her face in her hands. I never meant for it to go this far. Isabella's mind reeled. Tom Keller, the powerful businessman, had taken advantage of Maria's desperation. He had seen an opportunity to manipulate the very project that was meant to give women like Maria a second chance. And now, Isabella had to make a choice. Let the entire thing crumble or fight to save it. Isabella didn't hesitate. She took a deep breath, wiped the anger from her face, and made a decision. We're not going to let this go. We're going to expose Keller, and we're going to rebuild the center. We're not backing down now. She turned to the woman who had witnessed the exchange, her voice filled with determination. We need to gather evidence. We need to prove what Keller did and make sure this never happens again. Are you with me? The woman nodded firmly. I'm with you. Isabella's mind raced as she formulated a plan. She knew Keller's power, but she also knew how much more powerful truth could be. With Maria's cooperation and the help of those who had seen what happened, Isabella set out to gather the necessary evidence. They infiltrated Keller's offices, gathered documents, and exposed his shady dealings in the construction business. Isabella didn't do it alone. The women who had attended the community center, the ones Maria had originally intended to help, came together, their voices rising in solidarity. The center was no longer just a charity. It was a movement, and it had become more than Isabella ever expected. Together, they took Keller down. The media storm that followed was nothing short of a spectacle. Isabella was hailed as a hero for exposing Keller's crimes and for standing up to the corrupt system. But it was the way the women of the center rallied together, lifting each other up and fighting back, that left the strongest impression. And so, with the pieces finally falling into place, Isabella saw the true value of her choices. It wasn't the designer handbags or the wealth that mattered. It was the strength of her convictions, the power of kindness, and the resilience of those who fought for something greater than themselves. Isabella had found what she had been searching for all along, the meaning behind her privilege, and she would never turn back. Resolution. The weeks that followed the explosive media coverage were nothing short of transformative. Isabella felt the weight of the decision she had made, and while she knew she had taken the right steps, the aftermath wasn't as simple as she had imagined. The fight against Tom Keller and the corporate machine that had tried to exploit the community center wasn't just a battle for justice. It had become a personal journey for Isabella, a journey into discovering who she truly was, far beyond the designer labels and privileged lifestyle she had grown up with. The community center, once robbed and left in ruins, was now a symbol of resilience. Isabella and Maria, along with the rest of the women who had been part of the project, worked tirelessly to rebuild. What had started as a small blueprint drawn up on a crumpled piece of paper was now a thriving space for women in need, providing resources, counseling, job training, and the kind of support that so many had been denied. What was even more inspiring was that it wasn't just Isabella and Maria making the difference. It was the women themselves, the ones who had come to the center as clients and were now running programs, sharing stories, and lifting each other up. They had transformed the space into something bigger than just a building. It had become a beacon of hope. The lessons Isabella learned during this time were profound, and as the days turned into weeks, she found herself reflecting on the lessons that had shaped her life. She no longer felt the same pull toward the material world. The hand-me-down luxuries, the exclusive clubs, the fame, they all felt shallow compared to what she had discovered within herself and within the women around her. For the first time in her life, Isabella saw wealth differently. She no longer saw it as an object of personal pride or as a weapon to gain status. Instead, she realized that true wealth was found in community, in giving, and in knowing that you've done something meaningful with your life. Meanwhile, the story of the community center's revival spread across the country, inspiring many others to start similar initiatives in their own cities. The press, once fascinated with Isabella's supposed scandal, now focused on the center's impact. Isabella became the face of a new wave of philanthropy, one that wasn't about the wealth one had, but about the purpose they could find in giving. Maria, once consumed by guilt and fear, found peace. The sense of betrayal that had gnawed at her now seemed distant. She was no longer the woman who had faltered in a moment of weakness. She was the woman who had rebuilt her life, and through her actions, helped others do the same. But it wasn't just Maria who had changed. Isabella's relationship with her family, particularly her father, had shifted in ways she had never expected. After Keller was brought down and the truth of his exploitative dealings became public, Isabella's parents, though initially resistant, started to see her in a new light. Her father, a man who had always equated success with financial power and control, began to question his own views. He had always pushed Isabella to follow in his footsteps, to focus on maintaining the family's image and legacy, but he began to understand that legacy wasn't about the accumulation of wealth. It was about the impact one had on the lives of others. One evening, Isabella sat with her father at their family's mansion in the Hamptons, their home overlooking a stretch of quiet ocean. They had just finished dinner, and for the first time in a long time, there was no tension between them. "I watched the segment on the news," her father said, his voice low, "about the center, about how you brought the community back from the brink. I didn't understand what you were doing at first, thought you were playing some game, but now I see it differently." He paused, his eyes looking out the window. "I've spent my life working to build an empire, but maybe I've missed something." Isabella smiled softly, understanding what her father was trying to say, even if he couldn't quite express it in words. "It's not about empires, Dad. It's about people. What we do for others is what stays with us." Her father nodded slowly, his expression one of reluctant acceptance. "Maybe I've been wrong. Maybe you've found something that matters more than everything I've spent my life building." The conversation was a small but significant turning point in Isabella's relationship with her family. They didn't see eye to eye on everything, but there was now a mutual understanding. Her father had finally recognized that Isabella's path was her own, and that it wasn't about competing in a race for wealth, but creating a meaningful impact that could last far longer than any mansion or yacht ever would. And while this reconciliation was a powerful moment, it wasn't the only change Isabella was experiencing. As the community center continued to flourish, Isabella spent more time volunteering and connecting with the women who used the center's services. She was learning from them, not just teaching them. She heard stories of struggle, survival, and hope. She began to form friendships with women she once would have never encountered in her privileged world. They had no pretensions. They didn't care about brands or status. They cared about survival, about raising children, about rebuilding their lives after unimaginable losses. They had a strength that Isabella had always taken for granted. One of the most profound relationships Isabella developed was with Lila, a single mother who had spent years in and out of shelters. Lila had come to the center desperate, broken, and lost. Now she was a mentor to other women who were just beginning their journeys. Lila's resilience was unmatched, and Isabella found herself drawn to her wisdom and heart. Lila had seen the darkest parts of life, but she never lost her belief that people could change. Through Lila, Isabella learned that strength wasn't about how much one had, but about how much one could give, despite having little to offer. As the center grew, Isabella worked alongside Lila to develop new programs that would provide job training and financial literacy to women who had no resources or education. Together, They changed lives, and Isabella knew that this was only the beginning of the work that needed to be done. The moral takeaway for Isabella and for the audience was clear. Wealth, in any form, could never replace human connection. It could never replace the joy of knowing you have made a positive impact on someone else's life. True success wasn't measured by the amount of money in your bank account, but by the change you could make in the world. Isabella had been living a life of luxury for years, but it was only when she gave a small part of herself away, a designer handbag, did she realize that giving was the only true form of wealth. The final moments of the story aren't about the accolades or praise Isabella received for her actions. They are about the quiet moments of change. The women at the center, once broken and lost, now stood tall, finding their voice, their power, their worth. And Isabella, for the first time, truly saw herself not as someone who had everything, but as someone who had something to give. A gift more valuable than anything money could buy. Isabella had learned through all the struggles, through all the challenges, and through the betrayal she had suffered, that the true meaning of wealth was found in compassion, in understanding, and in the ability to change lives, one small act of kindness at a time. And with that realization, she knew that the future she was building was worth more than any luxury she had ever owned.